Hi, this is Jim Hilgendorf, along with my wife Elizabeth, on our journey, traveling together to a new America. You know, along this journey, I like to take a little time sometimes to just talk about some of the amazing people that have come before us, listen to their voices. One of these was Thomas Paine. Many people, I'm sure you too, are aware of Thomas Paine's contributions, especially his authorship of the inspiring pamphlets Common Sense and American Crisis, which led to his being called the father of the American Revolution. Not so many people, though, are aware of another series of pamphlets he wrote later in life called The Age of Reason, which resulted in his being ostracized by almost everyone in the very country he loved. Published in 1776, near the beginning of the Revolutionary War, his first pamphlet, Common Sense, had an extraordinary impact. In the first 3 months alone, about 100,000 copies circulated among the 2 million residents of the 13 colonies, crystallizing a growing sentiment among the people for independence from Great Britain. Subsequently, Paine wrote a series of other pamphlets called The American Crisis. The first of these pamphlets, also published in 1776, began with the famous words, quote, "These are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will in this crisis shrink from the service of their country. But he that stands by it now deserves the love and thanks of men and women. Tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered. Yet we have this consolation with us, that the harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph." Now, General George Washington at this time was in a pretty tight spot with his army and the war. And he took these words of Thomas Paine and read them to his troops to inspire them. President John Adams once said, quote, "Without the pen of the author of Common Sense, the sword of Washington would have been raised in vain," end quote. It was that powerful. Paine went also on to become an ardent and celebrated supporter of the French Revolution with his publication of The Rights of Man. Later, Paine published his pamphlet called The Age of Reason, which also had a powerful impact, but which caused him to be viciously attacked, so that even 100 years later, President Theodore Roosevelt would label him, quote, "a filthy little atheist," end quote. Paine was no atheist. He was a deist, or a person who believed that reason and observation of the natural world pointed to the existence of a single creator or absolute principle or law existing in the universe. In The Age of Reason, Paine wrote, quote, "I believe in one God and no more, and I hope for happiness beyond this life. I believe in the equality of man, and I believe that religious duties consist in doing justice, loving mercy, and endeavoring to make our fellow creatures happy. But lest it should be supposed that I believe many other things in addition to these, I shall, in the progress of this work, declare the things I do not believe, and my reasons for not believing them. I do not believe in the creed professed by the Jewish Church, by the Roman Church, by the Greek Church, by the Turkish Church, by the Protestant Church, nor by any church that I know of. My own mind is my church. All national institutions of churches, whether Jewish, Christian, or Turkish, appear to me no other than human inventions set up to terrify and enslave mankind and monopolize power and profit. Paine rejected miracles, revelation, and the authority of the Bible. And just as he had attacked the authoritarianism and tyranny of the British government and crown, so he now turned his attacks upon what he considered the tyranny of Christianity itself. He wrote, quote, "Of all the systems of religion that ever were invented, there is no more derogatory to the Almighty, more unedifying to man, more repugnant to reason, and more contradictory to itself than this thing called Christianity. Too absurd for belief, too impossible to convince, and too inconsistent for practice, it renders the heart torpid and produces only atheists or fanatics. As an engine of power, it serves the purpose of despotism, and as a means of wealth, the avarice of priests. But so far as respects the good of man in general, it leads to nothing here or hereafter. Whence arose all the horrid assassinations of whole nations of men, women, and infants with which the Bible is filled, and the bloody persecutions and tortures unto death and religious wars that since of time have laid Europe in blood and ashes? Whence arose they, but from this impious thing called revealed religion, and this monstrous belief that God has spoken to man? The lies of the Bible have been the cause of the one, and the lies of the Testament of the other. For the views expressed in the Age of Reason, Thomas Paine was attacked and vilified by the powers that be. At his death, he was almost a forgotten man. The great American orator and writer Robert Ingersoll later wrote about his funeral. On the 8th of June, 1809, death came. Death, almost his only friend. At his funeral, no pomp, no pageantry, no civic procession, no military display. In a carriage, a woman and her son who had lived on the bounty of the dead, and her son who had lived on horseback, a Quaker, the humanity of whose heart dominated the creed of his head, and following on foot, two Negroes filled with gratitude constituted the funeral cortege of Thomas Paine, unquote. But Thomas Paine's influence continued to spread, influencing countless lives struggling for a better world. Of the Age of Reason, the great American writer Mark Twain once wrote, quote, "I read it first when I was a cub pilot, read it with fear and hesitation, but marveling at its fearlessness and wonderful power," end quote. The great American inventor Thomas Edison wrote, quote, "I have always regarded Paine as one of the greatest of all Americans. Never have we had a sounder intelligence in this republic. It was my good fortune to encounter Thomas Paine's works in my boyhood. It was indeed a revelation to me to read the great thinker's views on political and theological subjects. Paine educated me then about many matters of which I had never before thought." Here in the United States, not too distant past, we were witness to a corrupt authoritarian government, motivated above all by money and power, wrapped in the flag of patriotism and supported by power-hungry fanatics of the cross. Paine saw a deep connection between politics and religion. He came to believe that a revolution in religion was a necessary prerequisite for a fully successful democratic political revolution. In other words, religion, or the way we see ourselves, our relation to each other and to this vast universe, is the key to unlocking a new world. The power is not outside us in the church, the government, in different stories of an external, omnipotent, tyrannical power, but in ourselves. We are the creators. We are the universe itself, waiting to come to fruition and bloom. Our potential is infinitely great, but we don't imagine it, let alone believe it. This is the role of religion now, to bring the power home to the common human being, to our common human heritage, and thus to transform everything: economics, politics, education, all transformed out of the inner transformation of one person after another, a chain reaction of light. And in the meantime, especially young people, let's keep faith in ourselves, in your greatest dreams for yourself, for other people, for our country, and for the world. Nam Myoho Renge Kyo.